Hello everyone, and welcome to today's presentation. Our topic for discussion today is accommodations for blind and visually impaired students in school. Now, an accommodation is anything that levels out the playing field for blind and visually impaired students. So, accommodations are essentially things that allow blind and visually impaired students to have equal access to academics and extracurriculars, and basically any aspect of school. So what accommodations are doing is that they are changing how the student learns, not what they learn. So accommodations are not, an unfair advantage that blind people have over their sighted peers. Accommodations are things that allow a student to succeed in the most fair way possible and be able to demonstrate their knowledge and perform, on an equal playing field. So without further ado, we're gonna get started. Here I have a list of 10 different accommodations. I'm reading them off of my Mantis Q40, which is my refreshable braille display. I'll talk about those later in this video, but let's get started. So number one is preferential seating. Now, preferential seating is an accommodation that can be given to either a blind person or a low vision person. So for a low vision student, they might prefer to sit close to the front of the class so they can see the board better, or perhaps they need more lighting in order to see their paper, so perhaps they prefer to sit near a window so that the sun shines in and they're able to have as much lighting as they need. Now, I'm blind, and so I had preferential seating, and I preferred to sit nearest to the door. And the reason for that is because it does make it easy to find my seat when I walk in, and also it makes it easier for me to be able to navigate my way out of the classroom once the bell rings, and not have to worry about maneuvering my way through the aisles and tripping over backpacks and people's feet and whatnot. So that's generally where I like to sit. I mean, even in college, I would choose to sit nearest to the door. But that's pretty much it about preferential seating. So our next accommodation, number two, is large print materials. So large print is used for low vision students who are able to read print. And if I remember correctly, in one of my textbooks, they said that large print could be from about 14 to 18 size font. It could be bigger, possibly, I'm not sure, but large print materials can be produced either by, the teacher enlarging worksheets, maybe, by adjusting the font on the Word documents or through other settings if he or she's using PowerPoint or whichever software, or they could be purchased commercially, so, large print books and, other large print materials. But that's a pretty minor accommodation. I don't think it's too costly to get access to large print. All right, so our third accommodation is braille materials. Now, this is an accommodation that's very near and dear to my heart because growing up, I learned braille. I started learning braille when I was 4 years old, and I received all of my school materials in braille. So worksheets, homework assignments, textbooks, pleasure books, classroom tests and quizzes, standardized tests. I received all of that in braille, and a lot of times, especially in elementary and middle school, the teachers would my TVI would attach the print worksheet to the braille worksheet so that if I needed help with something, I could just give the print sheet to my parents or my teacher, whoever it is that's helping me, and, I can tell them what problem I'm on, and they can help me with whatever it is that I need help with. But braille can be given to both blind and low vision students. Not all low vision students read print as their, or use print as their primary reading medium. Some do prefer to use both Braille and print, because sometimes reading too much print can cause eye fatigue and headaches, especially with larger quantities of print. But yes, Braille is very important, and I really hope that people see the importance. I know that there are a lot of people these days who seem to dismiss Braille because they think, it's too costly, it takes too much space, like, oh, we have digital things and audiobooks, like, why do kids need to learn Braille? But, Braille is literacy, and I mean, I could go on and on about this topic, but that's a topic for another day. But yes, Braille materials are very important. And for the longest time, up until probably the middle of high school, I didn't just read my assignments in Braille, I would produce my answers in Braille. So for tests, for homework, everything, and especially math. Math is a subject that I never would have been able to do digitally. So I'm really glad that I had access to Braille. Number 4, magnification devices and software. So, of course, magnification is used for low vision students who need things to be enlarged so that they can see better. So you can enlarge print, you can enlarge objects that someone is looking at. Now, there are different ways to magnify things. So there are handheld magnifiers, there are like video magnification monitors. There are probably other magnification devices that I don't know about, but as far as softwares, a lot of devices now have in their accessibility settings, they have softwares that allow you to magnify text. I've also heard of another really creative way that people magnify things, is that they take a picture of it and then they zoom in on the picture, or they like enlarge. Either they zoom in on the picture or they enlarge the picture. So that's also creative and a really awesome use of technology. So yes, that's what magnification is for. It's for enlarging things. So, that a student could use that for, completing assignments, or if they're watching a video in class. Very handy. So number 5, screen reading software. Now this one also is very important to me because I grew up using screen readers. So what a screen reading software is basically, it's a software that reads aloud everything that is on the screen of a computer with a synthesized speech voice. So if you're using a PC, the screen reader you'd use is JAWS, and if you're using an Apple device, you'd be using VoiceOver. Now, I grew up learning JAWS, and so in, I would say middle school, probably 7th, 8th grade, that's when I began to become more computer literate, and I started to learn how to use JAWS a lot better, and I learned how to use the internet, and that's when I really got into technology a lot more. And the thing with JAWS is that it doesn't come built into the computer. So for me, growing up, we actually had to use a CD. So you'd download JAWS, or you'd install it from a CD, and it was kind of a time-consuming process. But now I think you can download it from online. I'm not really sure, but currently I use VoiceOver with my MacBook and my iPhone. Honestly, it's hard to go back to JAWS after using VoiceOver because I do find it a lot easier, but I know that the majority of the world does use PCs, so at some point I will have to go back. But now, more than ever in school, having screen readers for blind and visually impaired students is very handy because students, now when I was growing up, students were not given computers by the school. So in high school, I would bring my personal laptop to school and I would write, I'd write essays. I remember in my AP Psychology class, my senior year of high school, I actually would type my responses for the tests that the teacher would give in a Word document. I also, in high school, began to do my homework assignments on the computer. Even the homework assignments that the other students were required to handwrite, I was given the permission to type because, of course, it would be easier than me brailing everything out on my Braille writer and having my TVI translate that into print. So that's how I used my screen reader. But nowadays, students are given computers. I know they're given Chromebooks, but I've heard that Chromebooks are not the most accessible for blind and visually impaired students. So I think that exceptions might possibly be made, and they give them maybe a Dell computer. I would need to do research on that. I'm not totally sure, but a lot of material is digital these days for school. So for a blind student, if they have a screen reader and the teacher makes the material accessible, they could use the screen reader to access the worksheets or to read any assigned materials or to take tests and things like that. So yes, screen readers, I could go on and on about what screen readers are used for, but it is a very important accommodation for students. And I can say that I personally could not go without a screen reader, especially in this day and age. Number 6, tactile graphics and/or manipulatives. So, tactile graphics... before we move on to the tactile graphics, I forgot to mention, so screen readers can also be used by low vision students, not just blind students. And it's for the same reason that I mentioned before about how reading print for some low vision students can cause eye strain and fatigue and headaches. So some students might prefer to actually listen along to what it is that they're reading so that they can give their eyes a break and they, have a more accurate idea of what it is that they're looking at. All right, so now actually moving on to the tactile graphics and/or manipulatives. So tactile graphics are a lot of times used for students who are either totally blind or have very little remaining vision, but they could actually be useful for sighted students too, but primarily they are an accommodation given to blind and visually impaired students. So a tactile graphic could be, I know from math, I had a lot of tactile graphics. So with geometry, the shapes, the angles, the line graphs with the slope and the curves, the bell curve and parabolas and all of those things. Tactile graphics are useful also in elementary school with learning about the different types of graphs, so line graphs, bar graphs, pie charts, scatter plots, anything like that. Sometimes tactile graphics can be useful in science, but I feel like this one can be kind of subjective. I know personally I was never really a fan of the tactile graphics in science, especially with really abstract concepts like cells and atoms and things like that. A lot of times the tactile images they really just felt like a bunch of blobs, raised blobs on a piece of paper. I guess they must have looked cool to the eye, but they looked cooler than they actually were. Like, they didn't really provide much of a function. But with the tactile graphics, there is this special machine that prints out like the raised images on this thermal paper. It's called a PIAF machine. I can't remember what it stands for. Print in a flash? Print in a flash. Yeah, I think that's what it stands for. But I will say manipulatives and models can oftentimes be a lot more helpful than the tactile graphics, especially with science. So in biology class, my teacher, when we were learning about the chromosomes and like the process of, you know, the DNA and the chromosomes dividing and all of that, she actually made models of the double helix and the chromosomes and everything like that with Play-Doh. And so not only did she use that as a teaching material, but when it came to giving me the test, she used the models for me to answer the test questions. So like when the students had to look at a diagram, instead of giving me the printed diagram, she used the Play-Doh models. And then in another biology class I took, we were learning, each unit was about a system in the human body. And so my teacher had this huge, like, life-sized human anatomy model, which was really interesting to use, and it was actually helpful for the entire class. Math, sometimes manipulatives could work, so like 3D shapes, especially with geometry when we're learning about like the 3D shapes like prisms, cubes, pyramids, cylinders, cones, those kinds of things. Social studies, tactile maps, possibly. When I was shadowing with the blind school, the history teacher actually had this really cool tactile map of the United States, and it was one that I hadn't actually seen before, but it was kind of like a puzzle board, and each state was in like a wooden thing. So the map was made out of wood, and the states were puzzle pieces, and you basically could like lift each state out of its little space, and underneath the state would be the Braille abbreviation. And in truth, I actually found that very useful as an adult, because I've looked at tactile maps of the US and they were really hard to follow. I also have a tactile globe, which again, it's one of the tactile things that looks cool but is hard to follow. So I think that sometimes some tactile things can be more useful than others, but in sum, tactile graphics and manipulatives are a wonderful opportunity for teaching a blind or visually impaired student, and I encourage any teacher to make use of tactile graphics and manipulatives when they can, because that can really make or break a student's experience with a certain subject. All right, number 7, extended time on tests. Now this one I don't think I'm going to spend too much time explaining, because there's not much to it. So basically, for a blind or low vision student, because they respond differently to tests, so you might be typing, you might be writing in Braille, maybe you write in print but you write a lot bigger, and perhaps a print reader might read more slowly, or they need to take frequent eye breaks. Whatever the reason may be, generally when a blind or low vision student is taking a test, it is going to take them a longer time to complete it than it is for a sighted person. And so typically blind and low vision students are granted extended time on tests so that they're able to finish. So it could be double time, it could be triple time. There are different times, but depending on what the student needs. Now, I will say, for me, I never really understood that extended time was a real accommodation, like a genuine legal accommodation, until I was in college, because it was kind of hard to accommodate it in school, because in high school, middle, high school, all that, I would take my tests in the classroom with the rest of the students. And so, of course, I never finished by the time the bell would ring. And so I would need to hand my test to my teacher, and then she would give it to my TVI. And then I would end up having to use the periods with my TVI to finish the test. And so there were a lot of interruptions and distractions throughout the day. And so that accommodation wasn't really met very accurately. And I remember my TVI would tell me, you get double time, you get double time. And I honestly wasn't completely educated about the laws, and so I thought that was just something that she was saying. I didn't know that it was official on paper. But when I got to college, the accommodation was put in place a lot better because I did take the tests in a private room, and the disability office actually had timers for the students who needed extended time. And so they would tell me exactly how much time I was allowed. And thankfully, I never actually came close to using up all the time that I was allotted, but it took a lot of stress off. Being in a private room, I didn't have to stress about the fact that everyone else was finishing before me and that I was too slow. I got to work at my own pace, and it worked. But yes, extended time is also very important accommodation, and it should be implemented, but I can definitely see how it can be kind of hard to be consistent. Number 8, assistive technology. Now, there are a lot of different types of assistive technology, so I just decided to kind of lump that into one because there's just so many things out there that a person could use for their vision. I mean, I already did mention the computer with the screen reading software, the magnification devices, there's a software called Zoom Text that's on the Apple devices. And since I'm totally blind, I've never had a reason to use it. And so I'm not completely sure how it's used. So I'm not sure if it's a magnification software or if it brings the text closer visually, like if it zooms in the way you would with a camera. I'm not completely sure, but as far as assistive technology devices, I'm actually using one right now. I'm reading this list of accommodations off of a device called the Mantis Q40. The Mantis Q40 is of the refreshable braille display family. So refreshable braille displays are devices that have a strip at the bottom. So here's my Mantis. So the Mantis is one of the few devices that is on the market that has a full keyboard. So this is the full QWERTY keyboard, and then at the bottom, I accidentally clicked something and it took away my list. I'm gonna have to go back and find my list, but here there are like metal pins that are raised up. They raise up to form the braille cells and the braille dots. So I can use this to take notes. I can use it to read books. So on Bookshare especially, I can download books on here and I can read. I've definitely used this a lot for grad school when I'm preparing for presentations like this one, making notes. Sorry, I'm navigating back to here it is. I'm navigating back to my list. So yes, refreshable braille displays can be used in a lot of settings. Now there are different categories of refreshable braille displays. Like there are ones that are just a display. They're not a standalone device. So some of them have to be connected to a computer in order to be of any use. So basically they are just, I've heard some people refer to them as a braille strip. So it basically just is the display. So you connect it to the computer or to the smartphone or to the iPad, and it produces, like the braille pops up of the print that's on the device. So that's a major assistive technology for blind people, and I'm sure low vision people who prefer to read braille could use this as well. Another really cool assistive technology device that I didn't know much about, but I learned about when I was at the blind school shadowing, is there's this thing called eSight glasses, And it's almost like a set of binoculars, but in glasses form. So it's like a headset that you put it over your head, but the glasses part, of course, goes on the eyes. And it's designed for low vision people. And the student that showed me her e-sight glasses, she told me that it zooms in. So it zooms in on text, and she told me that when she uses it, she can actually read regular print with it, which is really cool. And she's able to watch TV without audio description, which is also really cool. But it's like a mini version or portable version of a CCTV, which is the closed circuit television, which is like a video magnification monitor. And I remember there were a few low vision students at my school in high school, and they would use CCTVs, and they would have to be like transported on these wheelie carts, and they were like a literal television. I've heard now that a lot of students don't prefer to use that, and that there are other devices in lieu of CCTVs. And yes, also CCTVs along with the e-sight. Those are two different assistive technologies. So what I named so far, those are a few examples of assistive technology. There are probably other ones that I can't think of. Oh yeah, I used a talking calculator in math. I guess that would be considered assistive technology, talking calculator. Yeah, there probably are lots and lots of other assistive technologies. I mean, technology as a whole is advancing so fast, it's hard to keep up. But yes, assistive technology is a major accommodation for blind and visually impaired students in school. Number 9, copies of teacher notes. Now this one is one that I definitely used. Now, I'm not completely sure how much low vision students utilize copies of teacher notes, but I know for me, I was always given copies of the teacher PowerPoints and the Word documents and things like that, because I can't take notes the same way that a sighted student would. I would need, if I were to take notes, I would need someone to sit next to me and read aloud what is on the board. And this was before I used a computer to type things. I used to use my Braille writer. And what would happen, I actually did attempt in some classes to copy down as a student read aloud to me. But what I noticed would happen is that I would get so stressed out and focused on copying the notes down that I wouldn't absorb any of the knowledge. I would, tune out what the teacher was actually saying because I'm so worried about having the notes down. And also, I would type so fast sometimes that when I would look back at my notes, I would see a lot of errors, and I wouldn't even be able to, remember what I was supposed to have typed because I had been writing so fast. So for me, having copies of the teacher's notes helped me focus on the lesson, and, it allowed me to have the same access to what everyone else did. And in college, it was interesting in college because as an accommodation, there was actually peer note takers. So essentially what peer note takers were doing was they would get paid to share their personal class notes. So let's say the peer note taker was just a phenomenal note taker, which the ones that I had were pretty good at note taking. They would take their notes and then upload it to this folder that the Disability Services Office would have, they'd give them access to. And that's all it was. And so I didn't have to feel like I was, burdening anyone, because I wasn't the only person that would use the peer notes. And, the peer note taker wasn't doing anything extra. They were literally just sharing the notes that they were already taking for themselves. So I I'm pretty sure that for a lot of totally blind students, having copies of teacher notes in school helps minimize stress when learning, and perhaps for some low vision students as well. Now for our very last accommodation. Now this one is, I'm not sure how common this one is in everyday school, how common it is for the school day. I think it might be more common for like standardized tests and things, but sometimes a blind or low vision student might have a scribe. So I know that this can be a thing for like standardized assessments and things. So the student might give the answers orally and the scribe would write down the responses. And this could be helpful if a blind student perhaps has like other issues, maybe like if they have weaker, muscles or like fine motor skills, they have issues with like fine motor, it might be helpful to have a scribe. And even if someone doesn't have necessarily like muscle issues, sometimes it is easier to give answers orally. And I mean, I have had situations where unofficially I've had a scribe. So like if I'm taking a test in school, let's say the TVI didn't have a chance to braille the test, but it was like let's say it's a multiple choice test. Sometimes I might sit with the teacher and the teacher would read out the question, read out the responses, and I would give her, I'd give her my selection and she would bubble in the answer. So I have had times like that where I haven't had access to a braille copy of a test and someone, I'd do it orally and someone else would write it down. So I never necessarily would say I had an official scribe, but I have had to do things orally before. So this is a comprehensive list of accommodations. I found most of these on a Perkins blog post, the Perkins School for the Blind. So I think this is a pretty comprehensive list of accommodations. There are probably some out there that I haven't thought of or maybe didn't know about, but these are the most common. I had a lot of these growing up, but I think it's definitely important to raise awareness and to educate about these different accommodations. And if you're watching and you are a parent of a blind or visually impaired child, I hope that you found this very useful, and I hope you learned a few things. And if you're a future TVI like myself, I hope that you also found this enjoyable and informative. And this concludes today's presentation. Thanks for listening, and have a great rest of your day.